Alright, so here we're going to go through the worksheet that I handed out for you in class today. So hopefully you've had a chance to go through all of those problems. If you haven't, then pause the video now and try to come up with an equation for each one of those graphs. Remember, you're trying to find a sine and a cosine equation for each one of those. Also keep in mind, again, there are many correct answers. I'm going to show you what I think are the simplest answers for each one, but there are many correct answers as well. Okay, so number one here. So hopefully we notice, first of all, we want to find the vertical shift. Well, the vertical shift is 0. Okay, that makes things easy, or it makes things easier. Then I know I don't have to deal with a vertical shift. Next thing I'm going to look at is the amplitude. I can see that the amplitude is 2 because from the axis here, I go up 2 and I go down 2. Next thing I want to look at is the period, and I know that one complete cycle, so here I'm going to draw in one cycle of a sine curve, and I can see that that is a distance of 2 pi, which tells me then that b is going to be 1. Okay, so now I can come up with my equations. Well, if you notice, the sine curve that I drew started at 0, so that one's going to be pretty easy. I can say that it has a horizontal shift of 0. So one possible equation for sine would just be y equals 2 sine of x. Now for cosine, I have to have a shift. So I could shift it here, and that's going to be pi halves, because I know this is pi, or I could shift it here, and that would be negative pi halves. Either one would be correct. I'm going to use the pi halves, so I'm going to say y equals 2 cosine of x minus pi halves. Alright, next one here. So here, first thing I notice is I have a vertical shift of down 1. The amplitude is going to be 3, because from that axis I go up 3 and I go down 3. The period is again going to be 2 pi, so if I draw that in, that is one period of a sine curve, and that is a distance of 2 pi. Which tells me b equals 1. So now I can go ahead and write my equations again. Again, the sine is going to be pretty easy because here I started at 0 on our axis. So the easiest sine equation to write would be y equals 3 sine of x, and then minus 1. And for cosine, again, we have the choice of I can shift pi halves to the right or pi halves to the left. I could shift 3 pi halves and other choices as well, but those are the easiest ones, so I'm going to say y equals 3 cosine of x minus pi halves, and then minus 1. Okay, here, no vertical shift, so that makes it nice. So vertical shift is 0, amplitude is 1, period now appears to be pi, so here again I'm going to draw in one period of a sine curve, that's pi, so that means b is going to be 2. So now for sine, the easiest is to do the picture that I drew here, so starting at 0, so I can say y equals sine of 2x. Now for cosine, we need to do some sort of shift, and so if I shift right here, for instance, that's going to be a shift of pi fourths to the right. So I'm going to write this as y equals cosine, and remember I prefer to write b outside of the parentheses if there's a horizontal shift. It just makes it easier to write. So I'm going to say 2 times x minus pi fourths. If I have that 2 in the parentheses, then this becomes 2x minus pi halves. So this is how I prefer to write it. Either one is correct though. Okay, here on the next one, we have a vertical shift of down 1 again. My amplitude is 3. I go up 3 and down 3 from both of those. Period. So let's draw in a sine curve here, or 1 period of sine. So this whole thing is 1 period of sine, and that's a distance of 4 pi. So if the period is 4 pi, that's going to make b 1/2. So now, again, if I want to do sine, well, conveniently, again, I had sine start at 0, so I'm going to say y equals 3 sine of x over 2, and then minus 1. If I want to do cosine, I have to have a shift in there. So for cosine, I'm going to say it shifted pi to the right. I could also do pi to the left, and it would be a negative cosine equation. So I'm going to say y equals 3 cosine. Again, I like to write the b value outside of the parentheses so that I can see the shift easier. So if I write y equals 3 cosine of 1/2 times the quantity x minus pi, and then minus 1, here I can see the horizontal shift and I can still see the b value. Alright, here, this is number 5. We can see we have a vertical shift of 1. I have an amplitude of 2. And now this one, it's a little more difficult to figure out the period because I don't have this ending at nice intervals, or at least intervals that I've marked off. So what you can do is find how many periods exist in a certain distance that you do know. So for instance, if I start at 0, that's 1 period. Here's 2 periods. And here's 3 periods. So I covered 3 periods in a distance of 2 pi. So that's 2 pi, so therefore I know 1 period is 2 pi divided by 3. So the period is 2 pi thirds. If the period is 2 pi thirds, then I know b is 3. Now, if I want to do a sine equation, sine can conveniently again start at 0, so I'm going to say y equals 2 sine of 3x, and then plus 1. If I want to do a cosine equation, I need to figure out, well, where am I going to start for cosine? So for cosine, I'm going to look at this point right here. Well, how do I find what is that x value at that point? Well, I can think in terms of my intervals because I know that that would be the second point on the sine equation. So if I know the intervals, then I can know what that point is. So 2 pi thirds divided by 4 is going to be pi over 6. So that tells me that point has to be pi over 6 if that's 0. So I'm going to have a horizontal shift of pi sixth for cosine. So I'm going to say y equals 2 cosine of 3 times the quantity x minus pi over 6 plus 1. And so again here I wrote the b value outside of the parentheses so that I can see the horizontal shift better. Alright, last one, number 6 here. We have a vertical shift of -1. an amplitude of 1. The period, so I trace out 1 period of sine, that's a distance of 2. So that tells me b has to be pi. Now again, it's pretty easy for me to write the sine equation because I can start at 0, so there's no horizontal shift. I can say y equals sine of pi x minus 1. Now for cosine, I need to have a shift. Now here I can see pretty easily that these are exactly halfway in between. So I'm going to say that there's a shift positive 1/2 to the right. I could do 1/2 to the left. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to say y equals cosine of pi times the quantity x minus 1/2 and then minus 1. So that's my cosine equation. Again, with all of these, there are other correct answers. If you're not sure if yours is correct, you can ask me about it tomorrow in class. If you have any other questions on these, ask me tomorrow in class.